Hey everyone. For this episode of the podcast, I'm doing this interview with Zach Vorhies. He is a former employee with Google and YouTube. He is one of the big leakers that worked with Project Veritas. He's working with the DOJ currently. Pretty big deal. This interview is a pretty big deal. I'm really grateful to Zach for coming on. Very informative. You should learn a lot. We even break some news there at the end regarding YouTube, and I will be taking that and making a copy of that as a separate video. But that's in here. What else? Zach has some interesting opinions. I don't necessarily agree with him on everything. There's some one world government kind of stuff there that I don't totally agree with. But Zach is a very well-educated guy, very informed. Yeah, he has opinions that I might disagree with, but he has 1,000 times more experience. He's actually worked with Google and YouTube, unlike almost every single other person that is opining on the topic. So, give credit where credit is due. So, just giving you a heads up that this, I'm really like one last thing is, thank you so much, Zach. If you're watching, I really appreciate it. You are so awesome to do this. Thank you so much. The Google stuff is so important. We've given them so much power. We really should have been smart about it. I mean, when the idea that this company would forever be "don't be evil" seems a little silly to me now, but I'm sure I'm not the only one that kind of has that regret. But yeah, so without further ado, here is our interview with Zach Vorhies here on the Happy Warrior podcast and YouTube channel.
The Happy Warrior Podcast, conservative commentary on the news of the day from a more positive perspective.
Hello, everyone. It's great to be here with you today here on the Happy Warrior Podcast and YouTube channel. Really appreciate you watching. I have a very special guest. I have Zach Vorhies, who you can find on Twitter at Perpetual Maniac. Zach Vorhies, among other things, he was a senior software engineer and worked at YouTube and Google, and is one of the people in the last few years that's come out and revealed some of the crazy stuff that they were doing over there. He released documents with the Department of Justice. I think you said earlier that you've even worked previously for Lucasfilm. Did I hear?
Yeah, I did.
Yeah. That's a pretty interesting career you have. So today I want to go with him about his personal story, his experiences working over there at Google and YouTube, and what is his opinion of what they're doing now, and what that means for the country in the future, and maybe we'll ask some questions about YouTube because they're making some big changes there. I know a lot of people are curious about that. What is your background, Zach?
So I've been a software engineer. I had my educational background in computer science, mathematics, and psychology. And then I got a job working for the game industry, which is how I got to Lucasfilm. And then we're working for the LucasArts division. And then I went to work at Google and worked at Google for 8.5 years. The final 3 years was a hot mess as Google subverted itself to being a totalitarian regime, which blew my mind as I saw it. I would have never thought that would happen except by the fact that I lived through it. And I realized that that if Google was allowed to continue what it was doing in secret, that they would eventually rig the election. And there would be no ability to have a fair and free election in the future if Google is able to control the information space. So I gathered a bunch of documentation showing Google's secret censoring intentions because they were creating design documents and other documentations, presentations showing what they were doing. And I realized that no one would believe me unless I had the proof. So I gathered proof for a number of years and disclosed this information through James O'Keefe's Project Veritas and submitted the information to the Department of Justice Antitrust Division. And that's where we are today. The public is now aware of Google's censorship regime. They are now aware of Google's election meddling. And we are now watching what Google's going to do as these political theatrics kind of go through. Right now, we've got essentially a soft coup attempt against the duly elected president of the United States. And it's obvious for everyone that is following that and getting both sides of the news spectrum to see that this impeachment was based on fabricated evidence that was constructed by Clinton, George Soros, Biden, Obama, and a bunch of other deep state actors in order to get justification to remove the president of the United States. And as you can see right now, there is a bunch of censorship happening with Facebook and I think YouTube for the name of the whistleblower. And for a lot of people, this no longer comes as a surprise because of the stuff that I've been disclosing, warning people that this sort of thing was going to happen. And it's getting worse, and it's going to continue to get worse as we go into the 2020 election because there's an agenda that Google's executing on, and they're part of the deep state. And they are acting in accordance to the deep state's agenda, which is a globalist one world government agenda. I think they wanted it to be run by the UN or some other equivalent globalist institution. And now what's happening is that people are so fed up with the criminality and subversion that's happening. And it's not just subversion, it's like an inversion of what's been happening. And you can see this everywhere that you look. And as a result, people got so tired of it that they used their vote to have a backlash, populist backlash, to restore a sense of nationalism. And, rather than accept that democratic initiative, Google's gone 100% all in on trying to control the information landscape so that the globalist agenda remains in place.
All right. Okay. So let's back this up a bit. Okay. So we can give the people a better idea of your experiences at Google that would lead you to believe this. So when did you start working at Google? What year would you say?
So I started working at Google in 2008. I had basically 2 episodes that I worked at Google. One was for 5.5 years, and that was the Google Earth. I left for 3 years, then I came back and worked in their YouTube division. And that started from 2013 to 2016. No, I'm sorry, 2016 to 2019.
Oh, wow. So so you saw both sides of that. So what was your general experience? So let's lead it up to, because a lot of these people that have left YouTube struggling to, but Kernicki, Mike Wacker, and that, what I've heard from them is that kind of prior to 2015, 2016, YouTube Google was generally a positive experience. What was your experience working
YouTube was
there?
great. Google was great. Google was such a great company to work for. I mean, they really treated me well. They paid me well. They fed me breakfast. They fed me lunch. They fed me dinner. I got free massages on my birthday. Like, what's not to love? Oh, yeah, and then they picked me up from my house in a bus and brought me to work, and then carried me back to my house at the end of the night.
Oh.
And, when people talk about how great these companies are, it's like, yes, I can confirm that they are wonderful.
That does sound like a pretty sweet gig. So what was the culture like? Like what was the general attitude that you and your coworkers had, and what you heard from on top? Going back to the "don't be evil" days.
Well, it was really interesting because Google started off as like a libertarian company, and they were like laissez-faire, let it be, like let the data decide, have these unbiased algorithms, and we're not going to get involved in politics. They were like apolitical, but they had like a culture of progressiveness, but I would call it progressive light.
Mm-hmm.
And that was really great, and that lasted pretty much all the way until Trump got elected. And then as soon as Trump got elected, everything changed.
So what happened that you have this flip around 2015, 2016, where all the social justice warrior stuff happens? Google gets rid of its "don't be evil" motto. You have that famous meeting. I forget, what was it? It was at a TGIF right after the election, where where you have even the top the CEO, the CFO at this thing. I mean, they all basically come out and tell what a tragedy this was, how awful those Trump people are. It's a crazy video. I think Breitbart's the one that one was leaked to. By the way, were you able to attend that meeting?
I was able to stream it.
Yeah, and what did you think of it at the time when you saw that?
I was disgusted by the attitude and the behavior of the C-level executive class. I was disgusted by the behavior of the founder.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, Sergey Brin was there too. That's right.
Sergey Brin said that he was personally offended at the election of Donald Trump. And I thought that was so inappropriate to say. And I didn't understand why a company that had prided itself on the values of democracy would suddenly decide that because the outcome wasn't the way that they wanted it, that they were disgusted by the election outcome. And it was shocking to me that Sergey Brin would say that. I mean, especially given the fact that we had just had 8 years of Obama.
Yeah.
Like, Obama was a leftist candidate. I went to his inauguration. That's the way that democracies work. Sometimes you win some, sometimes you lose some.
Yep.
And the proper response to losing is that you lick your wounds, you regroup, and then you try again. And what I saw was a company's executive class stating that they did not respect the results of a democratic election. And and then not only was it Sergey Brin saying that, it was also the other executives. The CFO broke down in tears and stated that she was having a conversation. She's like, I think we're going to lose this one. She admitted that. I think we're going to lose this one. It's like, it's not your election. It's Clinton and Trump. I mean, we're going to lose this.
Yeah.
Mind-blowing. And she actually broke down in tears saying that. And what really shocked me was what the CEO, Sundar Pichai, said. What he said was that one of the successes of this election was using their machine learning programs to combat fake news. And I was thinking to myself, wait a minute, we're combating fake news? Since when are we doing that? And then I started to think about that, and I started thinking, well, wait a minute. If there's fake news, well, someone's got to decide what fake news is, right? And who is that? And so that led me down a rabbit hole that made me realize that there was a censorship regime that was being produced and being unfurled to Google's various products, and that program was called Machine Learning Fairness.
So what was it that it inspired you to start putting together your documents and starting to archive stuff and making you think about leaking and leaving the company? What got that all going? Was it this meeting, or was it something you said, or was it just a buildup of a bunch of things?
Honestly, it was just for the lulz. This stuff was like so horrendously evil that I realized that at some point it would get leaked to the media and Google would scrub it. So I said, you know what? I'm going to archive this offline and save it, because if I don't save it, then people will never believe that Google was willing to do this stuff. And I honestly thought that after the election hysteria would settle down, that Google would resume its normal mandate and just continue operating as a normal company. But what I realized is that, oh no, this isn't going back to business as usual. This is something really drastically significant that's happening within the country right now. And it looks like that Google's decided to step into the ring, use their power, their monopoly, in order to prevent the next Trump situation.
Wow, that is quite a statement. So let's jump into, so you worked with James O'Keefe's operation, Project Veritas. I think I heard you say in an interview that the reason you went to them is because you heard from someone to not trust the mainstream media. Do I have that correct?
Yeah. I was told that the New York Times, the Washington Post, and the Wall Street Journal would sell me out, and they would backstab. And I was told that there are a few places that I could trust to try to do this story justice, and that was Breitbart. So I had a contact send me to Breitbart, and then Breitbart was like, "Hey, actually, this is a bigger story than we're equipped to handle, because they don't do investigative journalism. They just do articles."
Yep.
And so what they said was, you really need someone to do a sting operation. And so they said that I needed to go talk to James O'Keefe at Project Veritas. And so I did. And not James at the time, but I talked to someone within Project Veritas, and I ended up receiving a handler, for lack of a better term. And this handler met with me over several months, and actually longer than that. It was actually a year when you look at the full time that I was hanging out with him. And he earned my trust, and I started to give him a mental download, and then later a physical download of the PDFs of these design documents that Google was sharing, and give it to him so that he could send it back to Project Veritas's main headquarters in New York. And that's how it happened. That's how Project Veritas got this information.
Yeah, and there was some really, there was a lot of big stuff in the leaks and what you had shared with them. I'm looking at like one of the big ones that concerns people that are interested in journalism was that they were running they did have a news blacklist. That's the word I'm looking for. Sorry. That they did run a news blacklist. You also shared that they were purposely, that they had plans for 2020. I don't know if this was you or not, but there was also things that said that they were purposely de-ranking conservative personalities, freelance, independent journalists, people they're not mainstream, but they're not necessarily on the right either, like Tim Pool, for example. And there's some pretty shocking stuff. And you shared this also with the DOJ. Am I correct?
Yeah, all 950 pages that were released to the public were also released to the DOJ beforehand.
So have you heard much from them since you gave them the documents?
Yeah, I went to Washington, D.C. and met with them.
Oh, wow. That's pretty exciting. Do you think they're going to, do you know if any investigation or if they're using those documents for anything?
I can't comment on that.
Okay, fair enough. Okay, so let's talk about, see if I can put my words back together. Sorry. So let's focus on the U.S. politics aspect of it. So you believe, according to the documents released, that Google is planning via its algorithms to support a certain political social justice agenda. And your stuff is kind of backed up also by researcher Robert Epstein, who says that, if unchecked, that Google or these algorithms by Google could possibly take a 50-50 issue and flip it 90-10.
For undecided voters, yes.
For undecided voters, yeah, which is quite a statement. So, why would Google want to go ahead and make this change? Why is Google so vested in influencing these elections so strongly?
So, that's a really deep question, and what I will say to that is, there was a study done in Switzerland, and what they did is they took all the available public information about who sits on what boardroom of what company, and they ran it through an algorithm, and they were able to create a network. What they found was like 120 people control all the world's industry. And this system was called the global network of corporate control. And so even though you think that there's a bunch of companies that are all independent, there's all these owners around the world, in actuality, there are very, 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 very few people that, own everything. And this network of global control, you can also call them the Illuminati or whatever you want to call them, but, the technical name is this network of global control. These are the people that are engaging in a systematic agenda to create globalism as the preeminent form of governance. They want to have a one world totalitarian, socialist order. You've seen this a lot, like all these articles, like, oh, capitalism is about to fall, capitalism is this, capitalism causes all these problems, da-da-da-da. But they'll never talk about how many people have been murdered under communist regimes. And not during war times, during peace times. And this push for socialism and communism across the world is part of the agenda of the globalists. In order for them to achieve that, they have to remove the barriers for that one world government. So what are the barriers? Well, it's nation states and country states that will stand up to the globalist rule. It's countries that are like, actually, no, we don't need trade. We are completely sufficient on our own. That's a threat to the globalist order. And so what the globalists have been doing is that they've been infiltrating and subverting countries around the world. So the United States, for example, was infiltrated and subverted, and it was covertly bankrupted in 1933 and replaced with the United States of America in all capital letters, which is a corporation. And so the unincorporated government that we had was replaced by a corporate government in 1933, and it's been owned and operated by this international conspiracy for the last 90 years. And you can look this up. Don't take my word for it. You can look it up and see about this default that happened in 1933. And so they really had a grip on America and America's military, which is the reason why America's military was pushed all the way around the world in order to destabilize countries all across the planet. And this conspiracy, this agenda is the reason. This agenda is the reason why Google's doing the things that it's doing. This agenda to subvert the democratic process when it doesn't fit the agenda of the corporate elites that run the world, once that happens, then democracy is pushed aside. And you see this in the United States with trying to cancel Donald Trump. You also see this in places like Bolivia, which just had a military coup. And you have to ask yourselves, well, why did they have a military coup? And when you investigate, what you find is that Evo Morales he had 2 terms, and he wanted to run for a 3rd term, but the Constitution said you can't do that. So he was able to push a constitutional referendum to the people, but the people responded back no, and they voted it down. And then he strong-armed the Supreme Court to overturn the Constitution and give him a 3rd term, and then he rigged the election so that he could get the 3rd term in office. And now, as a result of that, there's a military coup and removed him, and now the globalist media outlets are crying foul, saying, "No, this is a coup," and blah, 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 blah. But they won't ever mention the fact that this guy ramrodded through an illegal constitutional reform that bypassed the American people, and that he's been ignoring the will of the people through his own election rigging. And that's something that the media will never tell you about. And so you see this all around the world, that the media will always report and play lip service to democracy, but when democracy goes against the will of the globalists, then it's cancel the elections, or get the legislature to pass something, or get the Supreme Court to rod through. And if that fails, then cancel the democratic vote and try again until they get the answer that they want. And you see this not only in the United States and not only Bolivia, but you also see this with the EU. There's something called the Lisbon Treaty, where a bunch of people, there was a referendum, I think it was in the UK, but I'm not entirely sure, where the people said no, and then the Lisbon Treaty was backdoored in, and they said, sorry, you're going to be sucked more into the European Union despite the fact that you voted against it.
It is interesting. So for sure, I think you're right that it seems that Google is part of there's this feeling, I think, right now in the Western democracies that if democracy doesn't give you the right answer that you want to, then it's no good, and we gotta do it else. And I think the documents that you share kind of support this. I mean, Google, would you say, besides being anti-Trump, is Google anti-Brexit? I mean, have they, or I know your documents also point out, and maybe it wasn't you, but it showed that Google pushed on one side of the debate in the Irish abortion referendum. We know that Google, in the case of Spain, banned the Vox party, or I guess,
yeah.
I mean, that's interesting. It's interesting because at the same time that Google is kind of pushing, trying to mess with the algorithms to influence elections the way they want them to go, and social issues, one of the big things I think is worrying a lot of people is Google's relationship with another international community, which is China. What is going on there with Google and China? Are people right to be concerned?
Oh yeah. Google and China and the United States, really contentious issue right now, because the person that was running Google's cloud AI, her name was Fei Li. She was a Chinese national that moved to the United States and got accepted into Stanford, and then created all this groundbreaking work in artificial intelligence. She is opening up Beijing's AI lab. And what she stated in a Google blog post is that when it comes to AI, Google does not have boundaries or borders. And this is a real big problem because Google has a AI Manhattan project where it's rushing to create a godlike AI system that will be able to engage in planetary surveillance. And China has access to that. And now you may think, well, maybe it's just a civilian, not the military. But in 2017, there was a military-civilian fusion effort. And China stated that whatever was happening in its civilian industries would be forced to be shared with the military if it had value to their People's Liberation Army. And so if you put all of that together, what you see is that Google is intending to share its AI Manhattan project with China and China's military. And this is a really big problem.
So why is Google doing it? The arguments I've heard is Google, because the race for AI is such a big deal that the argument that Google's making to itself is, well, China's a bad place, but we need access to their data. You know, they have 1 billion people over there, and all that information that they are taking would be really useful in trying to figure out general AI before anyone, or super AI before anyone else. Is that it? I mean, do you think the leaders in Google are aware of what a dicey proposition that is?
Well, here's the thing. When we see these CEOs of companies, what we assume is that the story of their background and how they came to be wealthy multi-billionaires is a legitimate story. What we don't know and what's not talked about is how a lot of these people were inserted and are frontmen of these corporations, and that the people that really built the company are standing in the shadows, not revealing themselves. And once you realize this, a lot of their behaviors make a lot of sense. If you go to Mark Zuckerberg, the one question you should never ask him, because he will get angry, is the question of how he built Facebook. It's known that you should never ask Mark Zuckerberg this question, which doesn't make any sense. Like, if I created Facebook, I would have a story to tell every single person that asked me that question, right? Because it would be the crowning achievement of my lifetime, not something that I get mad if someone asks me about this. And, you know, what's happened is that these leaders, these figureheads that are acting as CEOs, they're not chosen because they're the brightest and most rational. They're chosen because they're the most loyal to this international conspiracy. And so if they weren't loyal, they would not have been selected for their role. Now, I'm not saying that they're not smart, far from it. They're probably really industrious people that work really hard and spend lots of hours. I'm not discounting that. What I'm saying is that they're chosen for their loyalty. And that's the reason why they're able to allow a company like Google to be infiltrated by the Chinese and to give them information that is of national security importance to the United States.
Okay, so Peter Thiel, the billionaire, I think he said this summer that he felt that Google was in a treasonous relationship with China. Do you think that's true? I mean, that's
Yes.
quite a bold claim.
Thank God that Peter Thiel called this out. And he actually connected a lot of dots for me that I was able to verify. And especially with the person, Fei-Fei Li, who was Google's AI cloud person and vice president. And that was a really important sort of link for me. And And yeah, he's 100% right that what Google is doing is should be questioned for treason, because I believe that it is treasonous to give, America's most valuable military asset just away to the Chinese Communist government and their military. That should be investigated. And what's a cherry on the top about all of this is that Google has used theatrics in order to cancel its cooperation with the U.S. military.
Yeah, the big kerfuffle over Project Maven last year.
And then also Project Jedi, which they were able to cancel both of those with the U.S. military. And now I think Microsoft is handling those projects. And so for the fact that Google's going to cancel its military contracts with the U.S., but then have covert secret agreements with the Chinese military is treasonous. And there's no other way to say it in any other way other than, giving our technology to a foreign adversary's military without the permission of the U.S. government and its military is a treasonous act.
Okay, I guess I'll try to close our interview to two more questions, if you would. Okay. The first one is let's talk about Project Nightingale. That is the latest in the news. Is Google and Project Nightingale. I don't know if you know anything about that story.
That's the health thing, right?
Yeah, that's the health thing where it sounds kind of like a cool project. The problem is they pretty much ignored the HIPAA law, if not in actuality, at least in spirit. And I think even there was someone that wrote in the Daily Mail that actually worked on this project that they had pretty big concerns. Yeah.
I mean, so I'm just going to go to my Twitter because I want to read you something that I wrote about this.
Okay.
And what that was that I'm going to read you is about the HIPAA, like how strict HIPAA is. So here you go. So the combined text of all HIPAA regulations published by the Department of Health and Human Services Office for Civil Rights runs to 115 pages and contains many provisions. There are hundreds of ways that HIPAA rules can be violated, although the most common HIPAA violations are impermissible disclosures of protected health information, unauthorized access of that, improper disposal of that, failure to conduct a risk analysis, failure to manage risk, the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of the public health information, failure to implement safeguards to ensure confidentiality, integrity, and availability of the public health records, failure to maintain and monitor the logs, failure to enter into a HIPAA-compliant business associate agreement with vendors prior to giving access to the personal health information, failure to provide patients with copies of their PHI on request, failure to implement access controls to limit who can view the PHI, failure to terminate access rights to PHI when no longer required, the disclosure more public health information is necessary for a particular task to be performed, failure to provide HIPAA training and security awareness training, theft of patient records, unauthorized release of the personal health information to individuals not authorized to receive the information, the sharing of PHI online or via social media without permission. So it's like, HIPAA violations are a nightmare for the health industry. They are so terrified of violating any one of the provisions in the 115 pages. You can't even look at a, health information without being HIPAA certified. The idea that Google can now go through and vacuum up everyone's public health information in order to do drug research and all these other things is astounding and shows that there is a double standard when it comes to what we can access as, citizens and commoners and what Google's able to get away. Like, we've had these HIPAA laws enacted for decades. Google's now just going through and blowing all that away because it's profitable to its bottom line for it to do so. And, as I've mentioned, Google's is lying to Congress, is perjuring itself. Now it's running afoul of HIPAA violations in order to conduct its business. And it's reckless. It doesn't even care.
Yeah.
And that's what I think of Project Nightingale. It's something that is forbidden by law. And rather than change the law, Google says it doesn't matter. We're just so big. We're just going to do whatever the heck we want.
Yeah, that's the craziest thing to me is all these big stories come out about what Google has done, is planning to do, and what we know it has done, both illegal and unethical. And they barely get a slap on the wrist. I mean, it's crazy if any other company, almost a non-Silicon Valley company, or if you or I was looking at health records illegally, or we were selling our services to China, I mean, we might get a visit from the government. Google does it, and it seems like the government tries to help them on their way. It's crazy.
Yeah, it's crazy. It's crazy. So, this is why I'm disclosing all this information and putting a lens to focus what Google is doing to the American public.
All right, last question. YouTube. Okay, so this is for people that are like YouTube, people who work in YouTube. What is going on there? So the consensus that I'm getting is that YouTube is moving away from traditional creators, just the proletariat, the broadcaster self types, and is moving more to established media. Is that an accurate assessment? I mean,
yeah, they're moving from YouTube to their tube.
Okay, and so why are they doing that? Is it just a money thing?
No, in fact, the move to this is sabotaging their revenue streams. And I know this because that's what they've admitted when I was working there at the company. They said that they were going to get to something like 4 billion watch hours in a month or something, which was a 4x increase over their previous year in 2015. And they missed their targets because of all the censorship. And the question is, why are they sabotaging their own profitability for this? And the reason is because they're trying to contain the populist contagion that is now rippling out through the United States. They want to stop Donald Trump, and apparently stopping Donald Trump is more important than their profitability or their fiduciary responsibility to their stockholders.
Wow. That is something else. So, what do you think of the changes YouTube is making? And some of them have already come into fruition. I think some are changing on December 10th. Do you really think that they're going to make it harder for the normal person to do channels?
Yeah. Like every time I go to Tim Pool's thing and I watch one of his videos, the up next algorithm will now select Fox News. And whenever I try to go to any one of the content creators that I like, it's always, the algorithm's always like auto playing Fox News or MSNBC or these establishment news channels. And it's clear that they don't want me to find new content related to the content that I really want to watch. And this is something that people have noticed, that their view counts from the recommendation engine have fallen to 10%, 5%, 1%, and it's just going to get worse, not better. It's really obvious at this point. And one of their biggest changes that they've just announced in the last couple days is that YouTube now reserves the right to cancel your channel if your channel is not, quote unquote, commercially viable.
So there's because YouTube in particular loves to be crazy ambiguous. And since you worked there until very recently, is that just conspiracy talk when people read the terms of service, say they're actually going to go ahead and cut people off, or do you think they will use that hammer?
Oh, I know they'll use that hammer. I mean, 3 years of watching this crap show continue on, I've now realized that the reason why. See, the thing is that the problem that YouTube has is that when they have canceled shows in the past, they have to do it in a way that's aligned with their terms of service. Like, we reserve the right to remove a channel for hate speech or blah, 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 blah.
Mm-hmm.
And then what happens is that they then abuse those policies to remove content that's objectionable to them. So, for example, Project Veritas uploaded a video of their executive admitting on film that she wanted to prevent the next Trump situation in 2020. And so YouTube had to use mental gymnastics to come up for a reason to censor the video. And they did it because of the privacy reasons. Well, now they're going to remove those mental gymnastics by just saying we can ban a video and a channel for whatever reason that we want, as long as that reason is within the container of not commercially viable.
Wow. That'll be something that's a little, I don't know, I'm mixed. I'm kind of sad, I really used to like Google and have a lot of respect for them. I remember in 2010 when they pulled out of working with China. I mean, there was a time and place where Google really seemed like a place that did believe that don't be evil model. I mean, I thought what they made possible was just amazing. I was a big fan. And what's happened to the company and even YouTube, which is a huge joy for so many billions of people. I mean, it truly is, for some people, I mean, that's all their entertainment. For some people, that's all where they get all their news. Yeah. I mean, it's enabled lots of independent journalists to pop up, that we don't need these giant traditional news organizations to get information out there. And to see them just kind of turn their heads on that is just a terrible disappointment.
I mean, it's not only is it a terrible disappointment, it's soul crushing, because what it means is that your model of the world was broken. That's what I believe in it, is that I sit there and I'm like, well, I thought that the world was controlled by a bunch of different, people all acting in their best interest. And now it turns out that the world is controlled by an agenda that's controlled by 120 people, and they're trying to execute it through their assets that are in the corporate layer of social control.
All right. Well, hey, thank you so much, Zach. This was Zach Vorhies. What is in the future for you, Zach? What are you working on right now? What are your current goals?
I am working on one thing, and that is to prevent Google from meddling in the 2020 election. And all my efforts are to prevent them from subverting the system of America. And the reason why is because if they're able to successfully subvert our democracy and put in their candidate, then we're going to go down a really bad place.
Oh, I agree.
The globalist agenda right now is to collapse America in the same way that they collapsed the Soviet Union, and then short sell all of the things that, all the assets of America. And there's a lot of oligarchs that make a lot of money when a system collapses. And from my understanding, they want the American system to collapse, and instead they want the Chinese system to replace America as the next world power. A collapse within America will destroy the wealth of this country and put our children and our children's children into a dystopian nightmare that's ruled by AI systems that have their eyes everywhere in our environment. And my fight is to make America safe and to hand off the same freedoms that we enjoyed to your children and your children's children. And I'm going to fight for the rest of 2020 to ensure that happens.
Well, hey, Zach, thank you so much for being so brave and making this personal sacrifice, leaving your super duper cushy job. It sounds like a real. I wish I got free massages on my birthday, but thank you for doing that. I appreciate it. And I'm sure a lot of people do. The news that you brought forth about Google, we just would have no clue that it was going on. We had people like Robert Epstein, but he can only show one side of the picture, and without people like you, we wouldn't know what's going on the inside. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Can I plug myself?
Yes, of course.
So for those of you that are listening to this, I encourage you to follow me on Twitter. My handle is Perpetual Maniac. And if you want to fight against the deep state and Google, then like my posts that out them. We're getting my tweets to the top of the reply stack to places like Don Jr.'s Twitter account and also to his father, Donald Trump. And what we're doing is we are raising awareness of what Google's subversion and treasonous activities mean for America. And as we spread that message out, people become activated and really positive things ripple out. And so for those of you watching, please join me at twitter.com/perpetualmaniac, and let's make America great together.
All right. Well, I definitely encourage people to check him out on Twitter at Perpetual Maniac. He is a fantastic human being, and I enjoyed this interview. Thank you so much, Zach.
Thank you very much as well. Thank you, Peter.
Okay.